Well, good morning, everybody. I think we'll get started. Welcome to Community Connections for August of 2020. As is the custom, I'll open with a few remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments, and we'll just have a discussion about what you guys would like to talk to today. You need to use a microphone, or I don't know if we can bring this microphone out to you, but speak loudly because we're trying to record it on Facebook, and we want to make sure that the people that are watching can hear it at home. So first thing I want to talk about is the news of the day, which is the Avaraz expansion, the decision they made to pull the trigger on their new long rail mill. I got a call from Chicago yesterday, and the board of directors of Avaraz voted to move into the execution stage for this project here. They put a couple other projects on hold in Russia, I think, but they've decided to proceed with this one. So I expect that they'll really publicize this in about October. They have another board of directors meeting, and they'll have a meeting with their investors, and that's what they're waiting for to really make a big splash. But you all know that's a significant boost to the Pueblo economy. $400 or $500 million is going to be invested in that plant, and I don't think it'll create a lot of new jobs, but it'll guarantee good paying jobs in Pueblo probably for the next 50 or 60 years. So that's going to be great for our economy. This breeze is terrific this morning, isn't it? I mean, it's nice and cooling. I want to express my thanks to Lynn Clark and the staff here at the HARP Authority for making this facility available to us today. This is a great place to do these when they're outside now and people can social distance and just feel comfortable. So talk about the coronavirus a little bit. Obviously, we're not done with the virus yet. It's not done with us. We have to live this way, I think, for quite a while in the future. So I think all of us need to get accustomed to that so that we can sustain the level of economy that we've got right now. Wear your masks when you're out in public. Don't attend any or hold any large group gatherings. The statistics from the state of Colorado say that this virus is being spread, number one, in bars, number two, in large gatherings, either public gatherings or large gatherings at private homes, and number three, in offices. So those of you who have businesses, if you can encourage your employees to work from home, I think that will help us slow the spread of this virus. But don't have large house parties. Just while we're trying to get through this, let's try to maintain this so that we can keep our businesses open. The city, as you know, has attempted to help businesses and citizens with the problems that they've experienced in dealing with the coronavirus. We put $5 million, made $5 million available from the half-cent sales tax campaign. About $2.1 million of that was in grants to small businesses in Pueblo. Next Monday, the City Council will consider an ordinance to contribute $100,000 to the Pueblo Board of Waterworks pandemic response campaign, which will make that money available to citizens who are having trouble paying their water bill. You might not know it, but 64% of your water bill that you get from the Pueblo Board of Waterworks is for city charges. So we're going to make that money available to help people that find themselves in a bind there. So also want you to know that probably the end of next week we'll have COVID-19 education and compliance employees out on the streets, visiting businesses, visiting bars, make sure they know what the requirements are for us to keep our variances, and make sure that those businesses are in compliance with those variance requirements. Again, our goal is not to punish anybody, to make sure that everybody's following the rules so that we can continue to keep our businesses open. The last thing we want to do is have to go backwards. Let me talk about the Columbus statute controversy briefly. Last night we had a special meeting of the Pueblo City Council. They voted 5-2 to ratify my signature on a contract with a mediator that I've hired to bring the parties together and see if there's a solution to this controversy that will work for Pueblo. I think you know how this controversy has been settled in other cities. I thought it was worth the time and money to see if we couldn't find a solution in Pueblo that's different than other cities. The mediator doesn't have the power to make anybody agree to anything. He simply will spend time, hopefully educating each side about the position of the other side and seeing whether there's any common ground. The cost to the city is going to be minimal compared to what we're spending on the protests and the controversies. Also want to talk about the protests. For the most part, the protests in Pueblo have been very peaceful, and unlike other cities in the state of Colorado, we haven't had any property damage, haven't had a single broken window. And I attribute that to the response of our police department and how they have handled this situation. They put up with a lot more than I would have in terms of abuse from the protesters, especially the one that took place last Saturday. If you saw the paper this morning, you'll see my comments that I believe that's illegal, some of that conduct there, and I hope that there'll be some consequences for those people. But, you know, obviously everybody has the right to petition their government, and we don't intend to impede that at all, but there are rules that have to be followed even if you're protesting. So one of the things we did is we asked people to send in questions to our Facebook page or to the mayor's office if they had questions they wanted me to address. And we got one question about loud cars, loud exhausts, loud stereos driving through neighborhoods and things like that. It's not legal to do that. And if you have that problem in your neighborhood, you should contact the police department. Obviously, it's a little tough for them to respond to that kind of call if the car's already gone, but they're certainly willing to respond to that. The other question that came in was about the street repairs. You know, a couple of years ago, a street repair utility enterprise was approved by the voters of the city of Pueblo, and last year we finally got, I think, an adequate fee to put some money in that fund. So this year we've budgeted $7 million for street repairs, and Sunday night they're actually going to start overlaying the streets. They've been working on the streets for months now in terms of getting in the curb cuts, making sure that every curb, every corner is handicap accessible on those streets that are going to be overlaid. That's one of the things we have to do pursuant to an agreement we have with the federal government. So finally, the people of the city are going to start seeing some street repairs. We got really favorable bids on the street projects, so we're probably going to add 3 additional streets and try to get them done as well this year. They're not at the top of the list, but they're streets that we can do quickly because they, for the most part, have those curb ramps in them already. And for the most part, the streets don't have to be rebuilt. They simply have to be milled and overlaid. So we'll be able to get some additional streets there. So we're going to continue to work on that and make that a priority because I know it's a priority for the citizens of this community. So let me just, you know, we talked about COVID-19 and the effect it's had on the businesses and on the community. I just got yesterday afternoon, and when this first hit and we had to lock people down and close our businesses, we became very, very concerned and did some modeling about, you know, what's going to happen to our sales tax, because sales tax is about 55 or 60% of the income for the city of Pueblo. So if the economy shut down and we're not generating sales tax, we're going to be in a world of hurt. So we started being conservative. Some of these outside agencies that rely on the city of Pueblo for some funds, we put them all on notice that, hey, we don't know what's going to happen to the sales tax, so you better be careful because you might not get that money that we promised you, because if we don't have it, we can't give it to you. But the sales tax numbers have been remarkable since this happened. I just got the numbers yesterday for June, and actually the June sales tax receipts for the city of Pueblo were up 11.6% over what they were June a year ago. In May, they were up 5.6% over what they were a year ago. The worst month was in March, and it was down 11%, but some of the modeling we'd done, we'd predicted as much as 70%. So I want to thank the citizens of the city of Pueblo for spending that money, and spending that money in Pueblo on taxable items, because that's allows us to put that money to use, to get it to those community organizations that will hire employees and provide services and keep that money circulating here. Obviously, there's some industries that have been hurt worse than others. The hotels are down, way down, because people aren't traveling. Conventions aren't happening like they were. Restaurants are down, but they're only down about 3% this in June over what they were June the year before. So that's encouraging. You know, we made a concerted effort to make outside space available to restaurants so that they could increase their capacity and make sure that they can have that spatial distancing for people. So I think some of those things are coming to fruition or paying off and have been good for the citizens of the community. So with that, I think I'll stop and open it up for questions. Who's got a question? Yes, in the back. I'll try to repeat the questions. Speak, or come down here and speak loudly if you can.
Can I ask you to give us a rough idea of the expense that the city entails in protecting the Columbus statute? And secondly, could you give us your idea of your level of concern about the armed protesters on both sides that seem to be assembling on Sunday?
Sure. So the question is, give an estimate of the expenses that the city has incurred protecting the Columbus statute, and what's my level of concern about people showing up armed on both sides of the protests. I can't tell you exactly what it is for the Columbus statute, but I saw some numbers a couple of weeks ago, and maybe it was before the last couple of protests, about what it had cost us in terms of manpower for all the protests that took place in Pueblo, not just the protests at the Columbus statue, but the three, I think, George Floyd protests and all those in the Columbus statue protest at that time were estimated to be about $65,000 in additional manpower and in the rental of the barricades that we put up on Abriendo Avenue on Sundays to sort of keep people in a confined space and cause as little disruption as possible. Now, with respect to people showing up with guns, I think that's a bad idea. I mean, that's just begging for trouble in my judgment. Colorado is an open carry state. I certainly would consider an ordinance in the city of Pueblo that said, yeah, you can carry, but if you're coming to a protest or an organized protest, you can't bring a gun to that. That's just asking for trouble. I'm not sure whether, when you start talking about restricting people's right to open carry, you go into another level and people start talking about, you're trying to take away my guns and those kind of things, and that's the last thing I want to do, but I think we have to use common sense and good judgment. Y'all know that the Pueblo City County Library District closed the Rollins Library on Sundays because of people walking around with weapons. Their concern, I think, was that, not necessarily a protester, certainly not a protester, but somebody who was a little off could sort of disguise themselves as one of those security people, get inside the library and create havoc if they wanted to. And for the safety of their patrons, they decided that as long as that was taking place, that they were not going to open the library on Sundays. And I think that's an unfortunate thing, and that's obviously one of the reasons why I wanted to bring a mediator in to see if we couldn't find a Pueblo solution to this problem. So, thank you for the question. Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, do they have to take a permit out to protest? And can the city say, no, we're done?
So, that's a complicated question. And it gets into people's constitutional rights. Generally, you don't have to take a permit out to protest. You have to have a permit if you want to have a parade. Now, the protests there on Abriendo, they've been limited to right there on Abriendo, and that's been pretty good, except for last Saturday. Last Saturday, they started on Abriendo, and they were marching down Union Avenue and Main Street without a permit, without a parade permit, and that's not legal. And we're going to take whatever actions we can to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. Obviously, we don't want to escalate the situation, but we know who the people are who engaged in some of those activities, and I think at the very least they'll be issued tickets to appear in municipal court and answer questions about parading without a permit, for harassment, for disorderly conduct, for the kind of language that was used there. And it might even go beyond that. But it's difficult to require a permit to have a protest and comply with the Constitution.
I'm the owner of the former bingo palace building right there on Embry and Main, so I want to thank the police for protecting their
Yeah. Like I say, the Pueblo Police Department has done an outstanding job. And compared to other cities, we haven't had a single broken window here. I mean, there's been some chalk put on the Columbus Statue Monument, but nothing permanent, no what I would consider significant property damage. So, and I've spoken with a group of business owners up on Abriendo and have encouraged them to keep their businesses open if they're open on Saturday. And if you have any qualms or concerns about, protesters coming in or somebody else coming in, not to patronize your business, but to create havoc, let the police department know. We got a lot of police officers on site there, and they'll be happy to help protect your business. So, and that, I don't think we need anybody else down there trying to protect the statue or trying to protect the police. That's early on, you had both sides down there, and all they were doing was trying to engage with each other, shouting with each other. We've really made an effort to say to the supporters of the statue, just stay home. The police department can handle this. You're just making it more difficult for the police to do their jobs if you're down there. So, and I think for the most part, the counter-protesters have stayed away. There's only been a handful of them, and it's not been nearly as contentious down there the last few weeks as it was when it first began. So, yes, Kevin.
So thanks for the update on sales tax revenues. That is certainly more encouraging. I realize, over the last number of months than most of us expected. How does that compare, to other Front Range cities north? And then I'm also curious, do we know how that compares to a Walsenburg or some of the valley, smaller towns? I'm guessing it's a different picture both ways. But
Yeah, I think it is. I think some of the other communities in Colorado have been harder hit. For instance, I would assume that those communities that have relied more on tourism than Pueblo has have been harder hit than the city of Pueblo has. So I don't know the exact numbers or really the comparable numbers, Kevin, in terms of how we're doing. But I think, all things considered, we're doing very well in the city of Pueblo. Could have been a lot worse. And I just think that we're going to get through this pandemic. And when we do, Pueblo is just going to be in a position to just take off. I mean, you can see it here, I think. We're talking to developers about getting in some apartment complexes and things like that so that people have first-class places to live. Hopefully that'll generate a little economic activity. Older people that are tired of taking care of the yard can move into some of these places, make their homes available. We've got a real housing shortage here in the city of Pueblo. And we've got to do something because that hurts our economic development efforts. If we don't have the employees for those companies that want to come here, it makes it difficult for them to bring their employees here if there's no housing available for them. So we need to keep working on increasing that housing supply, and we're working very hard to do that.
Back on the sales tax, do we know how it's split out? Like, how much came from Walmart, or how much came from pot, how much came from alcohol or gas?
Well, we know, yeah. So the question is on the sales tax, do we know how it's split out? We don't know, and that's confidential, what individual taxpayers pay, but we have it by categories. For instance, miscellaneous retail stores were up 31.5% in June. Department stores were up 12% in June. Building materials were up 36%. Restaurants were down, 4%. Auto sales were up 6.9%. Electric services were up 5.35%. Hotels, motels down 23.6%. So we have them by those categories, and we also have them broken down by the areas of town where the sales tax comes from. But the top 10 or 12 sectors where sales tax comes in are doing very well. Retail marijuana was up 28% in June. So people are staying happy. All right. Yes,
So
sir.
This past Saturday, I had family in town, and we wanted to go to breakfast at the pantry, one of their favorite things to do when they come to town from out of state. We shut down the pantry because of the protest. It's kind of hard to get tax revenues when businesses have to shut themselves down. The second comment, we talked constitutionally about open carrying. Any kind of ordinance put against that would be unconstitutional as well, because I'm pro-Second Amendment.
Yeah. So, yeah, so the question is, or the comment really was, a person had family in town, they'd like to go to the pantry, and the pantry shut down early on Saturday because of the protesters. And the second question is, if we do anything about open carry, obviously it could implicate the Second Amendment, and there'd be some resistance there. So I think you've identified, you know, on that second part, one of the issues here is how can we control that? And I wouldn't want to do anything with open carry, but perhaps not at an organized protest. You know, you can't have open carry. But again, I'm hoping there are other solutions that we can explore, and that anything that drastic would be a last resort, not my first thing. The pantry is one of the businesses that I talked to this week, and encourage them to stay open and, you know, contact the police department. In fact, I think they indicated to me that some of the protesters had breakfast there before they went out and protested. So at least that sort of stuff is happening. So
Discouraging to see the officers, there's 30 of them all in one little group. It takes not only the revenues, you know, they have to pay those officers, several of them overtime, but then they're not in the community doing other things that they need to be doing. And it's taking away from resources that they should have to be doing as well. So the protest going up there, I mean, I got caught in that. I just came down from coffee when I couldn't go to breakfast. I got caught in an illegal parade. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
The whole family had to watch that.
yeah, I agree, and that's one of the reasons why we're working to find a solution to this. Yes, sir.
Well, that's a constitutional issue too, the right to protest. So, there we go.
Yeah, no,
You can certainly protest, but if they don't have a permit to parade, you can't block streets. Resources from the police have to follow them and get in front of them.
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's sort of what we're trying to balance here. You do have a constitutional right to protest, and we want to protect that. That's how change is made, is people expressing their views to their government when they think they haven't been heard. We want to protect that. Likewise, the Second Amendment allows people to own and possess firearms. And Colorado, as they say, is an open carry state. If you don't have to have a permit if people can see where your gun's at. So I think it doesn't make any sense to bring a gun to a protest, but right now we don't have any laws on the books that can keep us from enforcing that. Yes, sir.
Hey, man, that question, I haven't heard anything about the electric vehicle stations and the city of Pueblo since about March. What's going on?
I just got a report. So the question is, he hasn't heard anything about the electric vehicle charging stations. Jim Neblick, like me, those stations where we can get power for that volt. And the city of Pueblo and Black Hills Energy partnered and got a Colorado Department of Transportation grant, and 3 new electric vehicle charging stations are being put in. And they're going to be operational, I think, in the next couple of weeks. They're already installed. The city council on Monday will pass on final reading an ordinance that sets the charges. These aren't going to be free stations like we've been accustomed to. So we're going to have to pay, but I think the rate that council is setting is $1.35 an hour for the charge there. And it's a contract with another company, ChargePoint, I think, that has a nationwide system of charging stations. So we're going to try and expand that and put in more and more as electric vehicles become more and more popular. I think that's a convenience. That's something that people that are traveling in electric vehicles look for, is, you know, where can I charge my car? I've, like you, probably seen people at the courthouse that pulled off the interstate to get a charge to get to Canyon City or something like that because they were just about out of juice. So we're hoping we can put more of those in. And as I say, this has been a partnership, didn't cost the city of Pueblo anything. Black Hills subsidized basically putting that in. Yes, sir. Okay, the question is, with respect to the Columbus statue and the Mesa Junction, who owns the statue and who owns the ground? And the answer to that is the city owns the statue and the city owns the ground. It's in the city right away. If the city decides to remove it, would the city pay the cost of removing it? Yes. Well, it was given to the city, well, I don't remember.
1905.
Well, that's when it was erected. Is that when it was given to the city? In 1905? So, yeah, and you know, it's on the National Historic Registry of Historic Places. It belongs to the city. I think that's fair to say. Yep, that the city has final responsibility for what happens to the statue. Okay. All right. Anything?
So with Everest coming in and they're rebuilt, or they're gonna build that new rail thing, are they gonna use local contractors or do you know?
You know, I'm sure they'll try to use as many local contractors as they can, but this is a project that's probably unique in the world. I mean, you don't just order the parts for this kind of a long rail facility. So I'm sure there'll be some international contractors involved and some big nationwide contractors to put a project like that together. But they'll be looking for local people, I'm sure. And those people that it bring in that work for those national companies, they're going to need a place to stay and live. That's why I think it's important for us to ramp up, you know, available housing here for them, because while they're here, they'll spend money here, and that's going to be a benefit to us. I forgot now how long it's expected to take to build that project, but I would think 3 or 4 years, as massive as it's going to be. There might only be one other facility like it in the world, and as they've gone through this design process, they've had to change how much land they annexed into the city of Pueblo, because as they designed it, they've discovered that they needed some additional space that they didn't think they needed when they started out. So it's a very, very, very complex project. And it's been a long time, I think, since $500 million project has taken place in Pueblo. Yes, sir. Yeah. So I think the solar plant will definitely be a go now. I think they were waiting to see whether or not Everest was going to pull the trigger here. City Council just annexed part of that property where the solar plant's going to be into the city of Pueblo and gave them an option to lease that ground. So I'm sure that project's going to go. It's a 200 megawatt power plant, basically, based on solar energy. And I think that Everest Steel Mill here will probably be the first steel mill in the world that's run almost exclusively by solar energy, renewable energy. So I think that's going to be fantastic for Pueblo. Just when that word gets out there that we've got this steel mill that's run by solar energy, it's hopefully some crazy things will happen here. So with respect to what kind of incentive did the city of Pueblo and the county of Pueblo give? I'm going by memory now, but I think the citizens of this community are investing about $125 million over the next 25 years into that project. It's going to be a $500 million project, and if memory serves me correctly, about $125 million of that is coming from the residents of this community in the form of tax increment financing. So an urban renewal area was created there for Everest. They're the only taxpayer there. Whatever real property tax will result from this will be paid back to Everest for part of those improvements. So essentially they won't pay any property taxes for the next 25 years, which I think the community felt was probably a pretty good trade-off. The city also is going to waive some of the sales and use tax for some of the equipment and machinery brought in there. I mean, that's sort of the trade-off we made to guarantee that those jobs would be here for a significant number of years. So, and you know, I think everybody would agree that those are probably the best blue-collar jobs in the city of Pueblo, working there in terms of wages and benefits. There's one question back there, then I'll come back to you. Yeah, well, thanks for the question. The question is, what's the city doing to make sure that the people that come in there and build a steel mill are local people, number one, and that are highly skilled and trained union workers? Right now, we haven't had those discussions with Everaz about that. Obviously, Everaz is a unionized shop. They've got a union at Everaz, and I think they'd be cognizant of the need to have skilled laborers build their facility for them. So we're obviously hoping that they'll hire as many people as possible. And I think the local unions ought to, make sure that there are people available that can work on this project. Oftentimes they've got to bring them in from other places, but to date we haven't had any discussions with Urban Renewal or with Everaz about project labor agreements or anything like that.
Okay, well, if we should, I think we should. I mean, that's one way of guaranteeing that the workforce is skilled and trained and that they're going to get paid a livable wage with benefits.
Agreed. Yeah.
I think it's very vital for our community.
Yeah, and I have no idea who the contract is going to be for this. I assume it's got to be a big nationwide or international contractor.
Which is what I was wondering what the city or or the council do to encourage that international contract to make sure that we are using the skilled trades individuals that we're going to deliver a quality product.
Yeah, once that contractor's selected, I'll certainly do everything in my power to make sure that we can do that. Yeah, because I think that's a good idea. You had a question. Yeah. And obviously making steel is a lot different. 40 years ago, 45 years ago when I was in college here, I worked summers out there on the labor gang, and you didn't have to know much, just had to have a strong back. Now I think you got to know a lot more to make steel than you did back then, and it doesn't take as many people to make steel now as it did back then. But yeah, this is going to be a great economic boost for this community. Okay, well, they haven't selected a contractor yet, so who would we have the conversations with? Well, we won't select the contractor. I mean, Everaz will select the contractor. And as I said, I'm certainly willing to have those discussions, and if the local unions have ideas about how we can make sure that the people that are working there are highly trained and qualified, I'm happy to sit down and have those conversations. But obviously they just pulled the trigger. I don't think they've even finished designing the project yet, let alone figuring out who it's going to be built by. Hopefully, when they select a contractor, they'll select a contractor that has labor agreements. So I would encourage you to organize the contractors so that whoever they select will have that kind of an agreement, and we won't have to worry about project labor agreements. They'll have a contract. So the question was the airport, and that we put some additional money out there. And the federal government's put some additional money out there as well. I mean, we got from the federal government a CARES grant for the airport of $1 million. So that's basically going to cover the expenses at the airport for this year. Obviously, the Pueblo Airport never was a big airport, but it's not immune to the kind of things that are happening to the airline industry. So all the flights in and out of Pueblo have been cut back, just like they've been cut back all over the world. I mean, there's just not as many people traveling on airplanes, I think, for good reason. But that extra money that we put in out at the airport is going to be CARES dollars that we've gotten from the state through the Fed, or through the state from the feds, that has to be used to address COVID-19 issues. One of the things we learned as we went through this is the airport was only being cleaned once a week. Obviously, we want to do a better job than that when you've got this virus there. So it's being now cleaned and disinfected, I think daily, and disinfect some parts of it more than once a day. So that's what we've tried to do, is put that money there to help slow the spread of the virus that might be around in the airport. So yeah, it's a terrific amenity, that airport. I mean, the private part of it, I think, still doing a good business. We'd obviously like to have more passenger flights in and out of there, and who knows, as the airline industry reimagines what it's gonna be when it comes out of this virus, there might be some opportunities for Pueblo. So
Tell me who I can talk to.
so the question is, what do we do with Douglas Bruce and his empty houses in Pueblo? Oh, okay. Well, that's a good question. Oh, you're right next to one of them?
Yeah.
And nobody's living in it? Yeah.
For years, since I was little.
yeah. And that's something that, I've tried to address. One of the ideas I had is that we should put a vacancy tax on vacant houses, so that if you've got a house and it's vacant and you haven't pulled a building permit for it, you're not doing any work on it, every year it's vacant, you ought to be required to pay $5,000, on your tax bill as a vacancy tax, because it actually incurs some expenses to the city, because we have to watch it. If people break into it, we got to go take care of it. If you're not taking care of it, we got to go cut the weeds, and then we put a lien on your property, and it obviously detracts from the neighborhood. Unfortunately, my legal department's told me you can't do that, and I don't know why. But they told me the reasons why. I don't remember what the reasons were, but it's still something that I want to pursue, something that I think we need to do. And I'm not interested in, getting money from these people. What I'm interested in is making that housing available to the community. So if you're not going to fix it up, sell it to somebody who will, so that we have that housing available to this community. Because as I said from the beginning, we need some additional housing in the city of Pueblo, and if we've got these vacant houses sitting around, let's try to do something with them. So that's a tough question. I mean, obviously, if they reach the point where they become a nuisance, we can put them on a demolition list and do those kind of things, but that's a pretty long list in the city of Pueblo, and we're not demolishing very many houses. Typically, we get to the point we're about to knock them down, and the owner or a new owner comes in and says, I want to make a deal with you, I'm going to fix it up. And, we typically give them some time to fix it up, and then they don't get it done, and a new owner comes in. It's one of those kind of things. We got to do a better job of keeping track of it, because I think it does not help our neighborhoods to have those kind of houses just sitting vacant. They're an attractive nuisance for people to break in, for homeless people, and they just detract from the value of our neighborhoods, as I said. Yes? We're working on that agreement. We haven't reached an agreement yet. Highways look better this year than they have in the past, in my judgment. I mean, the medians, I think the state's doing a better job, but we're in the process of trying to negotiate an agreement with the state about whose responsibility is it to take care of the state right-of-ways that come through the city of Pueblo, on Highway 50, on I-25, on Highway 96. 4th Street is a state highway, basically. So whose responsibility is that? We've sort of witnessed, I think, over the last few years, the state not wanting to maintain those right-of-ways and wanting to push more and more of that off on the city. So in connection with this new ILEX project, we were involved in designing some of that landscaping and things like that, so that we knew from the outset there that we're probably going to have to end up maintaining it. So we wanted to help design it so that we're not maintaining something that was going to be too expensive to maintain. The state doesn't want to take care of bluegrass anymore. On the north end, we've got those big grassy areas that sprinkling systems are obsolete. They don't want to take care of those anymore. So we're working on a system. We haven't gotten an agreement yet, but I've got a team working on it. I've met with the regional director of the Department of Transportation on this issue to try to come up with an agreement that will satisfy everybody. Understanding that, we don't have the equipment to mow some of these slopes that are on I-25 that the state has and that they've historically done. So it's a difficult thing that we're working on right now. Anything else? Anybody else? We still have 15 minutes. We're good? Okay, well, I won't keep you anymore. It's a beautiful day. Enjoy the Riverwalk, and thanks for coming. Next month we'll have another one. Maybe right here. We'll see what the infection rate's like. We might have to go back to virtual as the weather gets colder, because I want to make sure everybody's safe, and inside's not really a good, safe place to be, even with a group like this. So appreciate you all coming out today. Feel free to call me if you've got any questions, anything I can do for you. We're going to keep working to try to find solutions to some of the problems that we face in the community. But I'd like to leave you with, I think, my feeling that Pueblo has a bright future, that we're ready to go, and we just need everybody to pitch in and try to get on the same page and move in that direction. And I think if we can get that done, there's no stopping us. I mean, we're going to share in a lot of the growth that we've missed out on, that Colorado has enjoyed over the last 30 years. So we're going to need everybody's help to do that, and so I appreciate that. Thank you very much. See you next month.